value that tech can have, particularly for women and girls like that.
Thank you, Janet. And since we at Safe City also crowd map gender-based violence and sexual violence in public spaces, we know the importance of crowdsourcing data and crowd mapping it so that you can visually represent this information. Thank you so much for your work. And this information is really useful in so many different ways. Sylvia, I want to bring you in. How are you doing today? And can you share a little bit about your work?
Right. Thank you very much, Elsa. And I'm also very excited to be part of this part of this panel as well. So I am Sylvia Mukasa. I'm based out of Nairobi, Kenya, and I am a tech entrepreneur. So mainly my work revolves around using technology to solve problems. And we do this in different ways. So working with organizations, whether it's businesses or other organizations that want to innovate. Those are the kind of things we do, and we have a special focus on emerging technologies. Reason being, technology is forever changing, so it's always good to keep up to speed with what is happening. So our core focus is on the use of technology, um, looking at the emerging technologies space. So our work is mainly driven by our vision and our mission. Our vision at GlobalX being to drive a more diverse, inclusive, and competitive digital economy with a focus on emerging technologies that opens up opportunities for all. And our mission is to make innovations happen. So one of the things that we are trying to focus on is to push for the representation of women in emerging technologies. So Elsa, me and you were part of the AI lab that was organized by ITC ILO, and you noticed I was pushing a lot for, how do we get more women into AI? Because through our work, we get to see that women are very underrepresented in emerging technologies, and yet it makes sense for women to be part of the solutions that are coming out from this technologies. We have a role to play in the design. That's been. I know one of the panelists will be covering design and how tech needs to be inclusive from the designs. And so, if women do not have the right skills, then that means they cannot contribute to the solutions that are being formulated. So as we look at the digital era and what is happening, almost half of the world has, sorry, let me just fix this. Almost half of the world has internet access now, with the rest of the world catching up, and up to as many as, a lot of people, even in rural parts of the world, have access to phones because phones are becoming increasingly cheap. And technology can be used to solve these problems, just like what we are trying to do at GlobalX through our innovation labs and investing in women in technology. So technology can be used, for example, to end violence against women because activists can use it as a toolkit to stop violence against women from happening. We've seen interactive gaming platforms like Angry Birds in India that raises awareness about the tradition of dowry and the impact it has on women in India. We've seen social media campaigns, for example, masculinity, so fragile. We've seen technology being used to magnify the glass for gender inequality and gender-based violence. So you've just been talking about crowd mapping. So there's also the likes of Harris Map in Egypt that are being used to collect stories on street harassment, gang abuse, and assaults. And also technology is a tool that can be used to empower women, bringing them education and providing avenues through which they can tell their own stories. So using digital libraries, for example. So through our work, skilling children, skilling women, skilling organizations at GlobalX, we really want to ensure that people have the right skills to innovate.
Thanks, Sylvia, for that opening remark. I want to bring Ines now. Ines, you're based out of Portugal, and for the last several years, Web Summit, which is the largest conference of technologists, happens in Portugal. I was there some years ago. But you, more importantly, are the co-founder of Portuguese Women in Tech. So tell us a little more about that, as well as what does gender tech mean to you?
Definitely. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation. And also, it's really a pleasure for me to share this panel with such an amazing group of speakers that are doing such an important work around the world. My work I think, is a little bit different. I think is not as important, but what we are trying to do is to bring more women into the technology field in Portugal. And the reason we are doing that is that I personally have been working on tech entrepreneurship for 12, 13 years now. And something that I realized early on is like how few women are, on one hand, founders of tech companies, and how few women are actually building the products as a software developer, product managers, and so on in these startups. I remember working for some startups where we were a group of 20 and I was the only woman. And this never actually felt right. I never bought the common sense, or that usually people say like, oh, women don't like technology, women don't like math or science and so on, because the data doesn't support that, what people usually say. So I try to understand a little bit better like what can change. And since more or less 2010, I have been very actively involved in this women in tech movements, being part of these different organizations. And then in 2016, I realized like the Web Summit, as we were mentioning, was coming to Portugal, and I realized like if people want to know like the women that are behind all these like tech startups and tech companies that we have in Portugal, it's going to be very hard for them to find who these women are. So that let's give them some visibility, show who they are, what they are doing, and maybe in this process we can inspire young girls that are in school to basically to have a career in technology. And so we did that, but we very early on we realized that would not be enough. So to give you some numbers, in Portugal, only 14% of the professionals working in IT are women, and only 12% of the engineering students in our universities are women. So this is a systematic problem. This is not something that is getting better. It is actually getting worse. And so we realized that we need to do more. And what we are doing, we have this double mission. On one hand, we are supporting women that are already working technology, giving them training, giving them visibility, giving them the support they need to keep improving and keep growing as professionals. And if they want to build their company, so we also have done one program for entrepreneurship for female entrepreneurs, and we hope to do more next year. But on the other hand, we also want to increase the number of girls that look at technology as an opportunity. In Portugal is the country of OECD that has the biggest number of women studying STEM. The thing is, like, we have a lot of women studying science, but not that many women studying technology. And we want to change that a little bit. And we want to change that because we look at technology as an area of opportunity and as an area that can create wealth and where people can have good salaries. And if we want to decrease the gender gap or the salary gap between men and women, this is an area where we need to definitely have more women. So this has been the work that we have been doing. We still have a long way to go, but this is the fight we are having.
Thanks, Ines. And you've raised so many points. You've raised, women in tech, science, and STEM. The wage gap that will take 150 years to close. So unless we do something really drastic. And here I want to bring Ritu in, because you mentioned that there are very few women tech founders. And Ritu, can you share a little bit about the data dark and what does gender tech mean to you?
Firstly, Ines, I think what you're doing is, can you hear me? Ines, what you're doing is absolutely fabulous. You started off saying, I don't think I'm doing that much. And and then I was listening to you and I'm like, what are you saying? So, and I think that's something a lot of us as women do, you know, we sort of feel like we're not doing enough. And I just want to let you know that I'm very amazed and inspired by what you are doing. So thank you for your story. I started my tech firm when I was 18, and mainly out of two things: boredom and poverty, you know. And I have since got 61 people working with me, and I've recently founded a second company in tech as well, but it's a product firm. My views on gender tech: firstly, I pray for a day when we just say tech instead of gen tech or fem tech, and it's going to take a lot of time to get there. I'd like to highlight a few things along the way. Initially, when I started working, when I was in India, I started working in agri-tech, and we were trying to raise farming incomes. We built a dairy app because India is in the midst of a milk revolution for the last 40 years. And when we went to the farmers, we realized that often it would be their wives that were doing, that would be trained really quickly on the actual device. And so there was a lot of uptake grasp by the wives. So then the wives would understand what was being, how much money was coming into the family, which is something that then the men weren't too happy about, and then they deleted the app. So one of the main reasons why our dairy app, you know, we had 15,000 farmers only in Punjab, as opposed to a lot more, was because a lot of deleting happened when people found out how much their family income was, when women found out how much their family income was. I'm also keen to understand how all of us can be part of tech, because we are part of the digital revolution. And I feel that our children, like when I was a kid, my parents used to take me down the pink aisle, you know, that's full of Barbies, it's full of dolls. And my cousin brother was taken down the fun aisle, which had like Lego and other sort of things that build spatial awareness, critical thinking, etc. And I wish for everyone, as parents or aunts, uncles, anyone who has caring or is caring for a child, or has the ability to influence what the child does, is to start to introduce things like blocks for them. There's a company that makes tech toys for young girls, and they weave it into storytelling. The name is it's gone off the top of my head, but I'll put it in the chat once I figure it out. And I would really hope that in school we start to get more and more women involved and not scared of technology. We have Elsa here, who's solving a solid issue, right? She's solving the issue of violence against women. She's using tech, but she does not come from a tech background. She does not need to learn how to code. So you can be a woman in tech, and you can be part of a tech company without needing to learn how to code. Not that that wouldn't be nice, but you can be part of the tech space by adding value in many other ways, by bringing to the table what are the problems, what's another way we can look at it, by looking at user stories, by looking at usability testing, research, by UX writing. There's so many spaces. Product managers, some of the best product managers I know are women. So there are so many ways you can be part of this digital revolution without actually needing to code. And honestly, there are like little games like Grasshopper that you could learn how to do little bits of code, so that when you talk to an engineer, you feel, and I emphasize, you feel more comfortable, because it's about feeling comfortable. We put a big block before us and we say, I don't understand tech. No, you do. If you understand problem solving and logic, you understand tech.
Thanks, Ritu. And I think that's so critical because, you know, recently I mean, given that during COVID-19, our digital access and has just accelerated a lot. And, the world is moving towards AI and machine learning, etc. I felt that I needed to learn more. So Sylvia and I actually were part of a program by the German Federal Foreign Office where we were learning AI. And there were a lot of people from around the world from different fields who had absolutely no clue. Some were, of course, very well versed in the subject, but people like me who had a little more than a basic understanding of it were also part of it. And through these co-creation sessions, you at least start to understand how you can use it in your work, but also how others are using it. And like you said, you don't have to be a technologist, but your digital literacy is so critical in this world today that if you don't upskill yourself, you will be left behind. So thank you for pointing that out. I want to bring in Janet over here because crowdsourcing and crowd mapping in a way gives people agency and a voice, and they're also then part of the solution. But how do you think it's going to develop in the future? Because from my work, I've learned that there is a lot of investment that's required to educate people on how to use these kind of tools. It's not necessarily intuitive, and it takes some effort. So I'm very curious to know how you've done it with Crowd2Map Tanzania, but also how do you see it developing?
Thank you. So we have around 15,000 online volunteers who are mapping into OpenStreetMap. So they're from all over the world. And really engaging people like that is relatively easy because they tend to be in places like New York, Mumbai, Nairobi, places, they're educated, they have a reasonable internet connection, they have access to a laptop, etc. So, and really now it's easier and easier to connect with people online. However, the people that I'm really concerned about are the rural women in places like Tanzania, because yes, digital literacy, teaching yourself coding or not, and so on. All of these are wonderful, but really the reality on the ground is, these girls are cut against, they have their genitals cut against their will, then they're married off at a very young age, potentially to a much older man. They're effectively sold for cows by their family. And then their education is finished. And honestly, their education was probably not that great in the first place. It would have been at a school that probably doesn't have electricity, doesn't have water. They will walk many hours to school and many hours back again. And when they get home, it will be their responsibility to go out again, collect water, to collect firewood, to cook for their brothers. So really the choices that they have, the opportunities that they have are really limited. So I'm really interested in how at all technology can help women and girls like that, because it's a different world to people in cities like Mumbai and Nairobi and London. There's more in common between those educated graduates with good connectivity and so on than the reality of life on the ground in places like rural Tanzania. So every time I go to I'm passionate about tech, and I go to a lot of innovation events and so on, and I think it's brilliant, but I always want to say, but what about the women in the villages? How can they get involved? There's a lot of innovation hubs and so on, but they tend to be in places like Dar es Salaam and Nairobi. That's a very long way from rural Serengeti in every aspect.
And that's something to really think about, because if every solution is going to be on tech, whether it's finance, health, education, etc., etc. How are we going to even get these women or men or youth to be comfortable using it? And are we actually leaving them out of the system? I just got out of a lab which was talking about urban mobility, and people like the elderly, differently abled, um, you know, people at the lower end of the economic spectrum often may not have digital access in terms of devices or to the internet or even literacy. So, and then on the other hand, you have government where tech is accelerating at a speed that the government can't keep up with. So, Sylvia, how does work like yours, where you have investments on one hand and innovation labs on the other, help to bridge this divide?
Okay, thank you, and very good question. And just to comment on what has been said earlier about innovation happening in major cities, but other areas outside of the cities, like the rural areas, being left out, and that's very true. But then it's up to us to ensure that these people in rural areas are not being left out by the activities and initiatives we undertake. So just to speak a little bit on innovation labs. So innovation labs basically go by different names. Some people call them hubs, some people call them incubators or accelerators, up to you and how you want to call yours. So the role of innovation labs, according to me, they should be areas for learning and co-creation that bring the tech development agenda into action, solving the challenges that humanity faces. So, for example, for us, looking at challenges that women and girls face, as we speak about the 16 days of activism. And they should also be places where stories are told, places where the gender digital divide, e.g., through skills gaps, are reduced and solutions found and developed through hackathons, for example. Innovation hubs function differently in many different ways. So they can operate completely separately from the parent company, or be set up internally and staffed with existing employees. Okay, then they can also refer to programs that are set up for internal employees to ideate. So the key thing being ideation and coming up with solutions. So what we are doing, for example, at GlobalX Innovation Labs, is to ensure that as we look at skilling, for example, to close the digital divide, we are also providing solutions that can work for the different groupings of people. So this is why we start looking at children, for example, and not just looking at organizations. We start looking at the different demographics, and partnerships are a good way to reach out even to people in the rural areas. So so for example, what's happening in Kenya is a lot of people recognize the fact that a lot of innovation was only happening in Nairobi. So what's happening now is that a lot of incubators, accelerators, and hubs are opening up outside of Nairobi. And now they're working under what is called the countrywide hubs. So this is a collection of hubs that are based outside of the major cities. And I remember at some point I served as the next Einstein Forum ambassador for Kenya. And one of the things I did when I was holding the Africa Science Week, I went out to a town called Eldoret. It's in the Rift Valley region of Kenya, and it's a farming area. And what we did is we had conversations around entrepreneurship, which focused on farming. And we also had a hackathon where we came up with solutions for farming. So working to solve solutions that affected that particular area, because you have to identify where the issues are and then look for a way to sort out those problems using solutions that are easily available to people in that area. So for example, it doesn't make sense to use internet solutions in areas where there's limited connectivity. So maybe in those kind of areas, what would work best is just using voice. So pick a solution and a method that works for your target audience. There's no one size fits all kind of solution. Then as we speak about investments, because that's another area where there's a struggle. So looking at what's happening in the world right now, the demand for workers with tech skills will grow by as much as 90% over the next 15 years. And business leaders are projecting a shortfall within the next 3 years. And so that means this is a gap that needs to be filled. And we have to apply a gender lens to it. Otherwise, we are going to leave, again, women and youth and other minority populations out of it. And looking at gender inequality in the tech industry, the average is that 70% to 80% are men, okay? So that just goes to show why, again, women would be put off because there could be a culture of sexism that goes on that puts off women. So you have to invest in women businesses, you have to invest in women getting skills so that they don't, they are not left out. Otherwise, if we don't invest in tech businesses, if we don't invest in equipping women with skills, they're still going to be left behind. So it's important to look at the skills and also the investment side of it.
You raise a very important point. I guess all governments have to evaluate what are the skills required in the future and adjust the educational curriculum accordingly, which I don't think is happening. Our education curriculum does not cater to 21st century needs, and therefore it is left to NGOs again to provide these extra skills. Before I go to Ines, because what she's doing is trying to fill that gap in a way through the Portuguese Women in Tech. But I wanted to also highlight that from the Gender Alliance Summit that we hosted in August, we had several ideas that the network members wanted to work on, and several projects from Africa focused on providing STEM education to young girls in the Horn of Africa. And in Eastern Africa, right? And some of them were robotics and all kinds of tech. So, and you're raising funding for it. So hopefully the universe will respond to that. But Ines, when we talk about the numbers, we just don't have the numbers. You said 14% in Portugal, women in tech. But what about and I'm not even going to talk about leadership, but the rest of the world must be even less than that. So how does programs like yours help in making women feel comfortable with tech, but also then accelerating their opportunities?
I think you mentioned something that's very important, and it's something that I truly believe is that the first step for you to solve a problem is understanding that you have one. And I think a lot of the times when we have these discussions and when they are not, they don't have a strong foundation on numbers, what people tell me at least is like, with time, these problems will solve it by themselves. And I don't believe that. I definitely believe that we need to raise awareness to understand that we don't have enough women in this field. We don't have enough women in this field, and one of the reasons is because we don't motivate girls to pursue careers in technology. Whenever I go to a school and I ask, so what does an engineer do? And most of them don't even know, boys and girls. So people don't have any ideas about like what actually a woman in tech or an engineer, a software developer, or whatever actually does in technology. There are so many different roles. And like Ritu was mentioning, like for you to work in technology, you don't need necessarily to have a background of technology. And I think that's super important for anyone to understand that there's like this very wide range of opportunities and possibilities in technology, and maybe that might be for you. And another thing that I also happen is like when I ask, so who do you know that is a female engineer, a female product manager? And most of them, I think 95% of the time, people have never met a woman that actually works in technology, which means that most of their stereotypes in their brains are about these guys in hoodies drinking Red Bull and typing or coding until very late at night, that sometimes is not something that a lot of women actually want or relate to. Some do, but most actually don't. So I think what we try to do here is to break these stereotypes on one hand, raise awareness by providing numbers. And we did, so the numbers that I provide you with are from the Eurostat, so this European body of statistics. But we did a report on Portugal specifically to understand what are the women in technology actually feeling, how they are, what they have to deal with. And so we have a lot of numbers that show that women a lot of the times in technology, because they are a minority, feel discriminated and feel that they are not supported, and then have a very hard time actually reaching leadership positions. Because I believe that the number of female founders in Portugal is lower than 2%. I think around Europe, the number of female leaders is around 4%. I think in Africa and Latin America, the numbers of female entrepreneurs are actually a little bit higher, but still the numbers are still very, very, very low. And then another thing that is very important, at least in the work that we do, is show these women that they are not alone. I think a lot of the times when you are in a company, or you are whatever you are doing, you feel that you are the only one with that specific problem, or you feel like you are the only one feeling that at that specific moment. And we do a lot of work for women to share their experiences, and that's why we have mentorship programs, for example, and we have a lot of community building and a lot of community engagement to make sure that we can share and we can understand that we are not alone in whatever we are feeling. And that's something that's also very valuable. So this is the kind of things that we try to do, and make sure that the projects that we build, either a mentorship program, a award ceremony, capacity building, trainings, and so on, actually have an impact and actually can make a difference in whatever our target group is.
Thanks, Ines. Ritu, I want you to talk about the stereotypes, and as a woman founder, what are the challenges you faced, but also then talk about the importance of being a woman founder and influencing the design of the tech. You're on mute.
I'll start with the first one.
Yeah.
I keep muting because of my dog. I'll start with the first one. It's, one of the most disheartening things is to go to a tech conference and I'm a speaker and they give me a media badge automatically by just seeing my face. And they're like, oh, she's a woman, she has to be in media. And I'm sort of talking and to a sea of men. This doesn't happen as much anymore, but about 12 years ago, trust me, it was just a sea of straight white men when I spoke in Australia, which is where I started off. And it was nerve-wracking for me a little bit, but I've had training in the military and training in police, so I'm kind of used to being the only woman in the room. One of the things that I would like us to do for ourselves is to start giving each other business. If there's a woman out there who writes a check for tech work, make sure that tech is maybe a woman-owned business or majority woman coders, things like this. The dollar really drives change more than anything else. So I feel that if we can start putting non-development money into this, but actual, purchasing power dollars into this. And that's what Elsa did. She gave me her platform to build, and that's a check that she's writing to my firm. And that's fantastic. And I would love for us to collaborate more and to co-create more, and also to give each other business. I would absolutely love that, because that's exactly what men do. When they network at conferences, they give each other business. They're like, oh yeah, I know a guy. I've never heard someone being like, oh, I know a girl. Usually it's like, who does the best nails? I want to hear, I know a girl who will build an app. I know a girl who will solve this problem and understands AI and will, create the system that you need to facilitate change in XYZ. So I would love us to start using the phrase, I know a girl, and end it with something that's related to tech. And not just us who seem to be the converted ones, but let's, push it into workplaces and start to facilitate that. Elsa had spoken to, Elsa had asked me to speak about design. And here's where I feel that being a woman has really allowed me to have a little bit of an edge in software design. So the design is all about the user. And when we create designs in the physical world, a lot of us have the same experiences. So driving down a highway, we all have the same highway, the same exits, the same on-ramps, etc. But when you're navigating in the digital world, your experiences are highly personalized and full of emotions. The highly personalized experiences. Now, let's roll back once again to when you're a kid and think of people who understood you, who empathized with you, who took you. It's usually women. It's usually women who bring families together. It's usually women who are in HR. It's women who understand emotions. It's not that, we're created that way. We are facilitated to be that through our training, and people expect that of us. So one of the best things of being a woman and my women design team is that we can really get into the user's mind and understand their pain and pleasure points, understand what goal they want to reach. The way we start, I've noticed this, I've been designing and developing tech for other people for 13 years now. If I give a male designer, he says, stop talking to me about all of this, give me a features list. When I give it to a female designer, it's like, okay, who's the user? What emotions are they feeling? What parts of their brain are being triggered at this point? Are they bored? Are they stressed? What else is happening in their life when they are trying to book an Uber, for example? When they're trying to get takeout, and using Swiggy, which is like a Zomato home delivery app. What are they facing in their physical world that changes the ability for them, like, to put 100% of mind space onto this digital decision? So these are questions that my female designers ask, and I've never had male designers ask these questions. And I think using empathy in design is so strong. The product uptake, everyone that uses empathy in design ends up winning. The biggest unicorns in the world have used data and then come back, and improve the experience over and over again. But there's so little space, and there's an acceleration to be gotten if you use empathy from the beginning and design for humans and put the human brain, human emotion, and realize we're not all equal. We're all very, very different. Even if we're women, we all have very different minds, emotions, aspirations, home situations, etc.
Yes, thanks for that, Ritu. And I do believe that, if 50% of the population is non-male, then we should be also looking at their needs when designing tech, especially now since there's a lot of automation that's coming in where you're going to, have AI, machine learning, looking for trends and all. The biases creep in. So at this point, I want to open it up to our audience for questions. But if any of you have a question for any of you, like the panelists, please feel free to ask. Okay, so since you don't have any questions, I'm going to ask. So Sylvia, how would you like to respond to this, the way this AI is developing and the role of, or rather having a gender perspective in it? How would it help?
Okay, so when we look at AI, we are looking at different aspects of AI. So there's the product itself, then there's the ethics and the design. And Ritu has done very well at explaining, using empathy when designing. So what's happening in AI is the underrepresentation. I think across the world, there's only 18% representation of women in AI. So that means that the products that are being designed, the AI products that are being designed, are lacking the female touch and the female contribution to the AI solutions that are coming out. And we can see the danger of that. Just giving an example of, Siri, for example, could find a Viagra supplier, but could not find an abortion provider, just going to show that when these products are being designed by men, they think about what affects them without realizing they're leaving out, the input of women, which is very detrimental at the end of the day, because the products that are getting out into the market do not really represent, the populations, the different populations. So even in AI, if there's no female voice, it tells you that the AI products that are being churned out will again be biased, and it may not be deliberate. It's just purely because there are not enough women there. So we have to have that representation. More women need to get into AI. And there's the whole thing about lack of role models, not seeing women running businesses in AI or generally tech. All that is really affecting how the AI space is playing out. And AI is going to play a very big role globally. It's known that, rather, it's been predicted that by 2030, it will contribute to, actually not 2030, 2023, it will contribute to 15.7 trillion of the global GDP. So you can imagine if women are not represented in that space, we are losing out on the ethics that are being formulated, the kind of products that are being formulated. And again, we are losing out because we don't have the right skills. So it's very important that we start giving focus to these areas. And we can't sit back and wait for men to solve our issues. We as women have to actually be out there and champion for each other. Again, this has been said, we have to support each other. We are the ones who will find solutions that are suitable for ourselves. People that are not in our space do not understand our challenges. They do not understand what we need. So it's us to get out there and just ensure there's representation in all this space. When we're looking at policy formulation, when we're looking at product design, when we're looking at, the skills gap, we must give the gender lens to all this.
Those are really important points. And I wanted to ask Janet, since your work is, focused in Tanzania and the rural women, when we went through these lockdown periods during COVID-19, for most of this year, how did it impact women and girls? Because a lot of it was online, work from home, education from home, very little mobility. So how did it impact these women? And do you see that there's any effort from the government, for example, to bridge that gap?
Okay, so in Tanzania, the situation was somehow different in that the government did close all of the schools in April to June. And so because generally schools are a safe place for girls, and they're usually cut or subjected to FGM during the school holidays. So that certainly did put a lot of additional pressure on girls. So many of them were cut, married off and so on during the time when the schools were closed. So that was extremely difficult. The Tanzanian government decided that because people had prayed extremely hard, they decided that COVID had actually been eliminated from Tanzania. basically the schools reopened and there's no more lockdown and so on. So I can see Sylvia is somehow skeptical of that, the fact, which obviously most people are, but you can't really talk about COVID anymore in Tanzania right now. So, I mean, in terms of the online volunteering, I mean, really it made more people get involved, because suddenly a lot of people are working from home and have more time on their hands. So there's a huge disconnect between, you know, the people who can work from home and they can get online, and actually their life can go on more or less as it was before, whereas, you know, the life in the villages, which people cannot get online. You know, they very often can't get power to charge their feature phone, let alone, you know, data for a smartphone that they don't have. So there's a huge disconnect, really.
Elsa, you're on mute.
Yes, I know. I'm just trying to unmute myself. So I wanted to ask Ines. Ines, during COVID-19, what did you see in your community that was affecting women? We, like Janet says, that, you know, in Tanzania, because of the nature of the community, the female genital cutting went up. But we in India saw the domestic violence increase, and also the same was reported in various parts of Europe, right? So what did you also see similar stuff happening in your community or not?
Yeah, what I saw, at least I read about, on one hand was like the women lost more jobs than men. So basically during during this period, basically the jobs that were lost were mainly by women and not by men. This also shows the lack of resilience that we have around female employment, and definitely something that we also saw. And then on a smaller scale, in our more closer community, what we saw is I think you also already mentioned, is like very different situations. For some people, for some women without children, life continued more or less the same. They work from home, they have access to technology, they have access to good internet infrastructure, good computers, and so on. So they kept doing their jobs. I think for women with children, and because of the schools were closed for some time, they are now open, but they were closed for some time. That was a bigger challenge, because they needed to do their job, and then they had to take care of their children. Some of them have partners that are very supportive in that sense, others not so much. So that's definitely a challenge. We also saw an increase of domestic violence. In this specific case, in general, we don't have data for our community, but in general, and that. But I don't have the numbers. But I think COVID definitely showed that women were hit harder. I think because of this lack of employment resilience, for sure.
Thanks, Ines. Ritu, and this is a question to all the panelists, but starting with Ritu, if you had a crystal ball and you were to look into the future, how do you see gender tech impacting the world?
I think, you know, we all want to see equality on some level, but we're very far away from it. So tech that has been looked at with the gender lens, tech that solves gender issues, is one of the biggest and most important movements in our times. As you say, before the COVID pandemic, we already had a pandemic, which was violence against women. You know, the number of women that have been impacted by sexual violence or domestic violence or violence of another kind. I mean, every woman I know has been impacted in some way. I think when I look into the future, I really hope that there's more participation from women. It is harder and harder to participate as you go down the income ladder, though. I know in my own firm, the women who are working from home don't now have to cook as well and clean. Their mother-in-laws expect them in India to be doing those duties if they're at home. It is very noisy. It's difficult for them to do their jobs versus the men. The men are sort of left alone and saying, oh, he's working, don't disturb him. But even in my home, when I work, I'm expected to also do all the other duties, which involve cooking and cleaning and taking care of others. So these sorts of divisions and expectations do need to be worked upon by a group of people, including those who are in education, who are in society, social leaders, even media. If we, in India, if we all are, I'm sorry, we're running out of time, but in India, our TV series are watched a lot, and the man goes to work and the women stay home. So these are things that I would like to change, and only then can we see change in tech, because tech is its own bubble. It's surrounded by these other influencers. So we really need, as women in tech, I feel like we need to engage more and more with policymakers, with media, with everyone else, which is something that I know Safe City does, to facilitate this motion. And I hope that we do and do it well. Yeah.
Thanks, Ritu. Janet, would you like to attempt that question if you had a crystal ball?
Well, I would really like to see women in the villages being able to use some of the tools that we take for granted. So having access to electricity, water, and connectivity, and that would be an amazing start, an amazing potential liberation for them.
Thanks. Ines?
Yeah, I think I wanted to reinforce what Sylvia was mentioning before, the fact that we want women to be part of this technology future that we are building. And unfortunately, I don't think that unless there is like really strong things done, I don't think that's happening. So I'm not very positive about like the evolution of women in tech in the coming years, because I think for some reason I feel the gap is sometimes even increasing, because it's not only about the number of women that work in technology, it's also like what they do in technology, and AI being definitely a male-dominated world, and AI being so important for our future. I'm worried about what's coming, and that's why I keep on working. But as Ritu was mentioning, I think it's so important to engage policymakers and leaders on this discussion, just to make sure that we are not wasting time. That is very valuable at the moment.
Yes, and more so during COVID-19, where a lot of girls have dropped out of the education system. So we really have to keep a hawk's eye on the numbers and make sure the gap doesn't increase, it should decrease. Sylvia, last words from you.
Thank you. They say you serve the best for last.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the rest of the panelists have covered it all. But I'd like to add that feminist solutions need feminist approaches. So we can't run away from the fact that we need to be collaborating. So we need more feminist collaborations so that we see this technology is working for us with the input of everybody else. And then another thing I would like to say is that most of the time, especially the young girls, get exposure to technology much later in life than the boys do. So what we have to do is, because we know that, we have to ensure that as the girls get older, we then take advantage and make sure that they are getting the skills at that point in time. So looking at high school, most likely is when most girls would get exposure to technology. So let's work with what we have and take advantage from what we already know that is affecting girls getting into technology fields, or generally the wider STEM fields. I am of a different opinion, though, from what Ines says. I think as women in tech, we've come a long way, and there's a major difference. There's still a lot of work to do, but women are really getting their voice and they are really speaking out. We saw what happened the other day with Google when this lady from the AI lab, she took on the leadership. Yeah, so women are really finding their voice, and it's very much different from what it was a few years back. It will take time, but we are making progress.
I guess what Ines is trying to say is that we are impatient. We can't wait, and it has to happen now. So
yes, I'm very impatient.
how can we collectively make that happen? So thank you so much. I had so much of fun talking to you, Janet, Sylvia, Ines, Ritu. I'm going to add you all to take a group picture, but can somebody do that? Add pin, okay. To constantly learn, who are we missing? Ines and me. Okay. Great. So why don't we all smile and take a picture? So thank you, everyone. I had so much of fun talking to you. It's such an important conversation, and all of you brought in such important points on various topics. So this is not going to be the last of the conversations, but thank you once again for making time and highlighting such an issue. All the very best to all of you in your work, and I can see that you all have already started to share your personal details for collaboration. So good luck and keep us informed as to what's happening. And thank you everyone who joined us on Facebook as well as in the room. And we would love to hear from you as well. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.